Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you to Villanova Law School and to the Emerging Tech and Women's Law Society. Thrilled to see many of you who I know from last fall. And in our healthcare and law course, we did not touch on women's health, which, hopefully next time around we can, in part because historically, there's a poll. Do you want us to do the poll right now?
Yeah, whenever people can go ahead and answer, I was just gonna let you speak and let people answer throughout.
Okay, I'll move it over. Okay, here we go. So it's a privilege to be here, and thank you again, and thank you to our panelists for joining us. And why are we talking about women's health tech industry today? First of all, I think it's great this is an area that's largely misunderstood. And I see just based on the names today, there are a lot of women on this call, but not just for women, but also for men. It's also an area, as you're thinking about what you'd like to focus on or what areas of the law or whether you're going to practice law or not. When I was in law school 20 years ago, health law was not even a thing. I went to Columbia and we did not have a single health law course. Now, healthcare now is the largest industry in the US. So think about that. Just 20 years ago, there was not a single class on health law. And I would argue that women's health and the laws related to women's health, many of which are the same as laws related to men's health, will be one of the sectors of the future. Cybersecurity wasn't covered in law school. There are areas now, privacy wasn't covered in law school. So as you're thinking about opportunities for your own careers and opportunities where you can really be groundbreakers, this is a really exciting area. Also, you'll see our panelists are superstars. They are trailblazers in this industry. And I always think that, as women, when we're starting out in our careers, to see women in other positions and hear their journeys and how they became as successful as they are, particularly in an area that frankly is tough. And we're going to talk about investment. We're going to talk about the challenges that women in tech face, women founders. This is not an easy area. So our goal today is to have a conversation. This is not going to be a straight panel where we talk to you, but we're going to engage. All four of us have different paths in this space and are equally passionate. And that's something that we've talked about in class. Find an area, because the law is tough. Find an area that you are passionate about so that you can dig in and really make a difference. So I said, I'm Delphine O'Rourke. I'm a partner with Goodwin out of the New York office. And I work with women's health companies, whether they're founders, we're going to talk about founders, so those are entrepreneurs, whether they're established companies, these are companies that, have been in the market, have been making money, hopefully, as well as hospitals, health systems that are in the women's health space and investors. And again, touched on that I also, teach a course, and I've been advocating that we really need to think about women's health much more differently than it's been considered to date, which has been about abortion. And abortion is an important topic. Reproductive rights are critically important topics. That is part of a women's health journey, and we're going to touch on that more broadly. Okay. It is part of an entire industry that includes issues that face women when they're 90, issues that face women when they're 50, whether it's cancer, whether it's heart health, much broader conversation. And when Stephanie and I were preparing, I said, Stephanie, do you think the audience even knows what sort of women's health is? Because we find this all the time, and Kristen, Susan, and Brittany will touch on this. People say, what is women's health? Is that geriatric health? Is it, again, just reproductive rights? Not at all. So we'll dig into what exactly, and then specifically tech. And again, when we're talking about areas where there's such an opportunity for young lawyers, is a combination of tech and women's health. I started out in the women's health space doing GYN and OB and working with health systems to structure delivery models, GYN clinics. Women's health in just 20 years has exploded into the tech space, biotech, and it's really an exciting area. And we're seeing also, again, a lot of entrepreneurs who are in their 20s, 30s, coming up with solutions to the biggest challenges. So I'm going to ask Kristen, Susan, and Brittany to introduce themselves. As I say over and over in class, networking, networking, networking. And I know several of you on this call have gotten jobs through networking. Reach out to them. You know, if you have a question, if you want to be put in touch with somebody, if they didn't care about you and your future, they wouldn't be taking the time out of their schedules today to do this. So reach out, okay? And I'll be on your case if you don't. So I'm going to hand it over to Kristen and ask Kristen Begley to introduce herself and her journey with Wildflower Health, which is a really groundbreaking and inspiring story.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, congratulations for coming to this and putting a little extra effort into your day and learning about this. I'm actually a pharmacist by training, and this is my third company that I've led sales and account management. So chief commercial officer means you're making sure you sell more. So kind of like you guys, when I was in college, actually, maybe not like you may love law school, but about halfway through pharmacy school, I thought, oh Lord, I don't want to do this. And I'm 4 years into college with 2 years left to go. And none of my medicinal chemistry will transfer. So I took a lot of classes from nuclear pharmacy to working at the HIV clinic, which back when I was in pharmacy school, there was only 5 clinics in the country. And then I found a happy home in healthcare and business and insurance. And I thought, wow, this is really kind of innovative and problem solving, and I want to do this. So I took up a residency in managed care. I was writing articles for drugfacts.com, which led me into consulting, because I'm sure you guys, you've heard your parents complain about how expensive prescription drugs are. That was in about 2000. So I jumped into consulting for 10 years, consulting to Fortune 500 companies, how to keep employees healthy and make medications affordable. And from there is about when I jumped into the startup space. So I was living out in California, and a company pre-Series A, and what Series A means, it's your first round of funding. Usually most founders start their seed with family and friends to give them a little money to start up. Some are lucky and raise money right to begin with. And I spent 7 years there, and my first real sales job. So of course, I've probably had more jokes said about me in sales than you do becoming an attorney. Maybe that's a sore topic for you all. But so I had my first real sales job. Ultimately, I ended up taking over sales and account management. Along the way, I really got comfortable with what we call value-based care, which has a whole lot of legal ramifications we'll get into later when I tell more of the Wildflower story. Then I moved into a risk-based PBM. Again, you hear this word risk, which should really tell you a lot of attorneys were involved in healthcare. And then finally, the last 2 years after I made a joke while the panelists, we were all sitting in our own room, I'd worked with a lot of men, I'd worked for a lot of men, and made a lot of men a lot of money. And this crazy lady CEO that I'd heard nothing but good things about it called me up and said, I want you to come out of the pharmacy space and come over to women's health IT. I think you have all the right connections. You understand value-based care, which we'll get into that later in the panel. And I think you're a really good fit for what we're doing here. And I took that leap thinking, you know what? I'm going to support this woman. And you'll hear throughout this panel today, there's so few women CEOs, period, much less women getting money. And the founder CEO that I work for actually raised her first round, her Series A, while she was pregnant. So imagine sitting in a room, making a pitch to get your first $4 million to seed your company while you're pregnant. So we're really proud of our seed investors that invested in us. And there are people out there that'll support you, but these sort of functions right here and networking with your other female colleagues, critical. So I'll get into the Wildflower story later on in this, but really nice to meet you all and so glad you're here today.
And Susan, I'll notice that we also have some men, and I think that's great because women can't drive women's health on our own. And, we've seen there are amazing companies in the women's health space that were founded by men. And it's also that, that cooperation and allyship that is taking women's health from this concept of, oh, it's a niche. How can something be a niche when it's more than 50% of the population? But it's a perception change. So Susan, would you please introduce yourself, and then Brittany, and then we'll kick it off.
Great. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Delphine. And thank you so much to all of you for being here. I would just echo what Kristen said, the fact that you showed up. We know how hard it is right now to be going through COVID and a lot of the restrictions in place. And I know that you have a lot of choices and a lot of homework right now. It means a lot to have you here, and really appreciate you allowing us to share something I think that the four of us are really passionate about. And anytime we get to talk about FemTech and women's health, I think we're happy, because it's going to take a community of both men and women to actually change the narrative around how we address women's health. So my path was a little different than Kristen's. I kind of always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I was the little girl that in second grade would set up a cash register and make dinner for my parents and charge them. And I would get in trouble with my father. He would be like, this is part of just your part of being part of our family. You cannot charge us for dinner. But I did it a lot. I also was the one, I think I sold tickets for my sister to twirl around once and have people look through a hole. Not such a good idea. I got in a lot of trouble for that one. So I did some things that always were entrepreneurial. And my first job, I was lucky enough out of college, led me into a sales job similar to Kristen's path. And then my second job actually was on the founding team of a company that went public. And then that company split into two, and that second company went public. It was called the Advisory Board Company. And I was kind of on my way. I fell in love with healthcare. That was really what I wanted to do. And then a couple of years ago, I founded my own startup in the digital health space called VitalScore. And we realized very, very quickly that almost everything we were doing in health was greatly affected by women. And so that really brought me to understanding why FemTech, why women's health was really important. And when my co-founder and I sold the company at the end of 2018, I kind of had a moment where I thought, what do I want to do now? What do I want to do? And one of the things that really came to the forefront is to support other female-led businesses and female founders. And so I had always done angel investing, but I really shifted my focus to women-led companies, particularly women of color. And I am part of a group of women that started a fund 100% dedicated to women founders, and it's called How Women Invest. And what's interesting about this fund is actually more than 50% of the women that are LPs and founding LPs with me are also women of color. So it's kind of figuring out, how do you, as you change your career across time, how do you decide what is your passion? What do you get into? And so I would encourage all of you to follow that. I think you're going to hear that from the four of us, that there's lots of opportunity to change what you're doing across time. And my day job is I'm the Chief Growth Officer and Chief Operating Officer of a company called Ellipsis Health. And it's a machine learning company. And we use a little bit of speech to return back depression and anxiety symptoms. And that actually, as I'm sure you know, depression and anxiety affect women twice as much as men. So it's my way of also being in women's health. I'm also the director of HIT Lab's Women's Health Tech Initiative, and I'm going to hope that all of you will come see some of our events. We spend a lot of time educating others, men and women, about women's health and supporting the entire FemTech and health tech community. And this is something that Brittany does as well. It's something that we share in common, and you'll hear a lot from her later about FemTech. I saw in the poll that some of you didn't know what it was, and this is a great way to learn about it. So thank you again, Delphine, and thank you, Stephanie and Sarah. And I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you, Susan. And just, you know, I mean, it's rare that someone in their career is involved with an IPO, which is bringing a company public, builds their own company that they then sell to another public company. I mean, this is not Susan sort of, it rolls off her tongue as though it's, you know, just something that you do on a random Saturday, plus starting the first fund that's, you know, fully focused on women founders. So thank you, Susan, for
I'm just a founding LP. There were a lot of people involved. It takes a village.
She's always humble. So thank you. And just for driving in HIT Lab, you know, check it out. Susan, among the other things that HIT Lab does, and Brittany was part of this as well, is founders from all over the world can pitch their ideas and then get investors. And it's a really interesting way to, and all over the gamut. I mean, we had one company that was helping Syrian refugee women track their, you know, their health status and their health needs to, another company that developed a device for pelvic floor. A really dynamic event happens in November, and I think you can come for free. So we can share that info. Dr. Barreto.
Hi, I am Dr. Brittany Barreto. My background is in genetics. So I have a PhD in molecular and human genetics. I have way too much personality to work in a lab my whole life. And so I got real nervous about what career I was going to take on as a scientist. And I found entrepreneurship. So I actually think a lot more scientists should become entrepreneurs, because a lot of your startup life it's like a giant PhD project. Honestly, you're like under a lot of stress, limited funding, like, you're on a time frame, your committee is your board. It's weirdly similar. So I started my first company in grad school called Faramore. It was a DNA-based dating app. We were the first DNA-based dating app to go nationwide in the US. I did that for about 2 years, having fundraised for it, built a team, the product. Unfortunately, after 2 years, Apple came out with some new policies limiting who can ask for DNA in the App Store. That might be of interest to y'all as law students, genetic information, and can you patent a gene, and who owns that, and like, who's liable? Like, should companies like tell you, things about your genome? It's really, really interesting. Happy to talk about genetic ethics with y'all, but so Apple changed their policies. We got kicked off the App Store. My company died. Sounds terrible, but actually happens a lot. And most people, when their company dies, they don't talk about it. So we think it's like this rare thing. I did. It's like more than 90% of companies happen like that. So after that, I became a venture capitalist, working as a senior venture associate for the most active fund in Texas called Capital Factory. They're based in Austin. They hired me to launch their Houston branch. So I did that for about 1.5 years. Came across this thing called FemTech, which I'm really excited. I think the first question of the panel is going to be for me to define it. I'm going to keep you in suspense, so hold on. So I came across FemTech, fell in love with it, and said, oh my God, I'm going to get a job in FemTech. And I tried to go on Indeed, like FemTech, and it was like, has no results. What? And I'm like Googling FemTech, and I'm like, where's the conference? Where's the fund? Where's the accelerator? And I was like, oh my gosh, don't think those exist. Well, how about a podcast? Not even a podcast. So in March of last year, we went into lockdown, as we all know. And I said, what better of a time than to start Zoom meeting with people, recording it and throwing it on Spotify. So I started FemTech Focus. Definitely check it out if you like podcasts. It's really great. We just celebrated our 100th episode yesterday. It's been 1 year since we launched, and FemTech Focus has grown into much more than just a podcast. Our podcast has 30,000 downloads in over 100 countries. We now also have a virtual community with nearly 1,000 FemTech founders on it. We do research, so we are revealing new data all the time on FemTech, which is the data that founders need in order to convince investors to put money into it, proving quantitatively that women's health is not niche. And so the last thing we're working on right now, it's definitely not the last thing, but the next big thing is raising a venture fund so we can start investing in FemTech. So I'll stop there, but I'll drop the
diabetes and treating diabetes and thinking about how do you structure a, let's say, anti-kickback statute compliant diabetes model. Women's health, yes, it's focusing on advancing the lives, improving the health of women. However, it's not something completely foreign. It's just applying the same concepts, whether they're legal or business, to a different subsector. But tell us what it is, because most people really don't know.
Yeah. So I'll define it real quick for us. So FemTech is defined as innovations that are improving women, female, and girls' health and wellness. This includes things that are targeting ailments that solely, disproportionately, or differently affect women. So solely, you can think about menstruation, menopause. Differently is the symptoms of a heart attack are different in women than in men. And disproportionately is 90% of Hashimoto's patients are women, and we don't know why. So those are like some examples real quick. You can definitely check out FemTech Focus. We have a .org. We have a tab that says what's FemTech. That you can go there too. And I just want to say, like, why do we why is there now a word that was coined by Ida Tin, founder of Clue, in 2016? Why do we even need a word? Why isn't this just healthcare? Here's some shocking facts for you. So maternal mortality rate is increasing. The US has the highest maternal mortality rate than any developed country in the world. Me, as a 29-year-old woman, am twice as likely to die from childbirth than my own mother. Number two, we know that seatbelts kill women. Seatbelts are made for a male physiology. We know that, and like nothing is being done about it. It wasn't required until maybe, I think it was like 10 years ago, for them to even make a female dummy for testing, but it is still not required for car companies to test with them. The anatomy of the clitoris was discovered in 1998. There is 15% of women who have never had an orgasm. Women are twice as likely to have Alzheimer's. And even when I was doing Alzheimer's research in college 15 years ago or so, I was taught that it's because women live longer. But any basic mathematician could see that twice as many Alzheimer's patients versus women living longer doesn't add up. And so we don't know why. Women die of heart attacks more than men because our paradigm of what a heart attack looks like, chest pain, numb left arm, it's actually what men portray. Woman, the number one symptom of a heart attack for a woman is extreme fatigue. And so she's told, oh, you're probably just anxious, and then they die. The last statistics I'll give you, I have many of them. Here's the last one. It was illegal for women to be in clinical trials until 1993. I don't think it was till 1997 that they even made a rule that said, like, you have to consider gender as a variable in research. And so what this looks like is women having 5 times more symptoms from drugs because before they're ever in the market, they're never tested on us. And news alert, women are not little men. We have our own metabolism and hormones and systems. And so that is why we have this thing called FemTech, because calling it healthcare was not focusing on women enough. And FemTech is an opportunity to really look at medicine, innovation, and healthcare through the female woman's lens.
So, and Brittany, I have to add, if you're a woman of color, the numbers are even worse. Until very recently, dermatologists, for example, in medical school, in the textbooks, didn't even touch on skin of color, right? So they were trained on white skin and guessing. And maternal health, women of color in this country are 3 times as likely to die in childbirth. Latinos 2.7. So there's also a subsector of FemTech focusing on historically underrepresented subgroups of women. Also including, women over 60, right? And this is one of my big irks, is that, they say menopause, and premenopause and postmenopause maybe starts late 30s. And I've seen reports that put it out into the 90s, right? A woman who's 39 has different health needs than a woman who is 90, yet everyone's bumped into the same group, right? Because it was just, oh, she's menopausal and let's put her out to pasture. So really big change. So Brittany, before we move on, yes, I say it's a moral imperative to focus on women's health, but moral imperative, as we know, doesn't necessarily move the needle in business. So why all of a sudden is there attention focusing on FemTech or women's health? Tell us a bit about the numbers.
I wish everyone just cared about vulvas as much as I did, but apparently they don't. So they need numbers and they need graphs and whatever, capitalism. So we've done the research because that research wasn't done before. If you look, PitchBook still does not categorize companies as FemTech. So it's really hard to even quantify, at me raising a venture fund, I'm get asked, well, how many deals are there? How much value is there? How big is the market? And these numbers did not exist, which is insane. And so FemTech Focus, we have an amazing team, a lot of MBA interns. I love them. And we actually just revealed yesterday at our summit some of the big statistics. So some of the ones I want you to walk away with today is that to date, we have a record of 587 active FemTech companies. These are companies that are specifically targeting women's health and wellness. That's not like they're targeting both genders. So it's just one. So 587 FemTech companies. There's been 48 exits in the last 20 years. There's still a paradigm that a FemTech company has never exited. That is not true. And then, by the way, an exit is like you got bought by Google or you went IPO. So if anyone doesn't know what exit is. So 47 exits in the last 20 years. The average value of a FemTech exit is $408 million. The reason that's so significant is that it's almost twice as much as the average tech company's exit. So average tech company exit is 280 million. And when women's health companies exit, we're at a double value. And so moral of the story is like, if you can't come around to loving vulvas, if you just love money, like this is just a smart move, honestly.
It's the growth area. We just did statistics, 31 billion women's health industry just 4 years ago, and expected next year, and they're all different stats, to reach 44 billion. So you might say, hey, the new car industry is 4 times that, but it's only growing at 1%. We're consistently in every sector. There's certain sectors like mental health, and Susan, you touched on the mental health and the growing mental health sector. There's certain sectors that are growing at 15%. It's like telehealth 10 years ago, but overall the industry is growing at 7%. And, I know you all, or not all of you, but some of you may have student loans and also looking for a paying job. This is what I say. This is not a pro bono exercise. This is not a DE&I exercise. This is a sector which is booming, where there's a lot of opportunity for smart lawyers. So Kristen, FemTech. You don't like the term. It's a controversial term. Why does it need to be focused on fem? Why can't we just say tech? Your thoughts and how you approach, what's your lens on it?
So I actually have a greater appreciation that we have a tag, right? I have a greater appreciation that people will be able to find us and you can get tagged with it. But, kind of a mind-blowing thing is that women make 80% of healthcare decisions in the United States. We represent 90% of dollars, not because it's all on us. And we do spend more money in healthcare with our every year OBGYN appointment from the time we're 14 on, but because we make decisions for our aging parents, our spouses, and our children. So in my world, and I know we'll get a little more into this later, we allow women who we call the chief health officers of the home. So even if she's not working, even if her main job is being mom, she's making decisions for her whole family of what healthcare, and those could be through community groups. It could be looking, things up on ZocDoc, whatever, star ratings, talking to her friends, etc. So women, think about that. We control 90% of the dollars in the United States. What specialist do you see? Do you see a specialist? Do you call telemedicine? Do you go to the ER? So we think healthy, educated women, empowered, educated women equal a healthy population. And I do want to circle back to one of Brittany's other comments, is that, women haven't been studied, people of color haven't been studied when it comes to pharmaceuticals, because I'm a pharmacist. And some of that wasn't just like the evil empire. It was kind of protective too. And women themselves don't like to enroll in clinical studies because they're fearful of childbearing years, since the ovaries you have, the eggs you have, are the eggs that you have. We won't go into biology. And actually that's a whole nother topic that I was shocked when we sell and talk to large Fortune 500, very educated women who really don't understand their bodies, how they get pregnant, all of those things. So the pharmaceutical testing on people of color and also women, it's been, some self-selection where people didn't want to from bad past experiences, but also some just what we were comfortable with. So anyway, I wanted to address that. But to us, again, FemTech, women are population health. And if you look at giving women birth control in countries that they've never had it and giving them an education, that is when countries really succeed. And if you think about the big saying, like the West wasn't settled until women moved out there with their, whoever, their partners, whatever, we really make a big difference in society. So education is really key, and it's a lot of what Wildflower does.
So tell us more about Wildflower. Because I think, there's still this view of women's health is OB, it's GYN. okay, but you, and I would touch on your point, empowering.
Yeah.
And as Brittany points out, although Brittany, I can't really see it, maybe it's because it's too small, even though I've bit my big glasses. But Brittany's tagline says, "Women's health is everyone's health," and we see that over and over. And we also see data that women put everyone else's health in front of their own. So women's health is everyone's health, and everybody else's health comes first. And one of the many concerns of COVID is that we're going to see a spike in cancers, breast cancers, ovarian, cervical cancer after COVID, because women have not been going to get their preventive care because for a variety of reasons. You've got virtual care, you've got, mom and dad in the nursing home, all these different reasons. So such linchpins from a behavioral standpoint, so if you can really, address women's, organizational behavior, interpersonal behavior, and then from a pocketbook perspective. So tell us about, and we're also, again, getting to Susan, is mental health huge. 70% of Americans are saying they are struggling with depression or anxiety during COVID. And depression is different for men, different for women, a lot of different factors. This is a crisis that we need to address. But Kristen, so how do you empower? Because you have a platform that brings it all together.
So we were founded as a software as a service, which, if you boiled it down to what you would feel as the patient or user, it feels like an app to you. But it's the best app that's ever happened. If you've ever tried to navigate healthcare, which most of you probably haven't had a lot of experience with healthcare because you're still young, it's clunky. Your doctor knows some things. Your health plan may try to call you if there's case management. They're completely separate. They have, and maybe your school has a mental health hotline for you, Ginger IO or somebody like that, because they know the stress that COVID, all of those things are disparate and you are left by yourself. And God forbid you use Dr. Google, right? Dr. Google is very dangerous. Googling the world is flat. So what our application and the first phase of Wildflower was creating an elegant consumer experience like you experience in Pinterest. I know I'm like in my 40s, so that might be a little lame for everybody on this call, but Pinterest or Netflix, it tells you what you want to rent or buy based on what you look at, the things that you're interested in. Why doesn't healthcare, particularly if one day you want to have a baby and it's really stressful if you're not getting pregnant, when you've spent your whole life not trying to get pregnant and then you want to get pregnant, it's really stressful and you can go to a lot of dark places on Dr. Google. So we provided a white label software as a service, which ultimately to you means an app, to hospitals and to payers to provide tailored, personalized feeds of information and even lifestyle fun stuff. We've all fallen off MyFitnessPal, right? Where you're doing your steps and your exercise and then you quit doing it. So we put in some of that good stuff of, taking a Zen break, getting your extra Z's, what are vegetables, healthy things. For women in particular that are managing their whole health, we also allow them to put in their entire families in this application. So if you have a 3-year-old, talking to them about bicycle helmet safety, because we know, and this is really sad, we know that women will put their family's health in front of their own health if it comes down to this choice. So we actually get more user activation when there's kids and a husband. We still love our partners, sometimes same-sex partners. We have a whole, actually one of our customers is a huge tech company and they hire us just for our diversity content and LGBTQ content because we are very holistic when it comes to surrogacy and other things. We also believe in full family health. So it starts, in pregnancy is a great place to onboard a mom and keep her, I'm a pharmacist, addicted to the app by allowing her to put in her family, by allowing her to put in her aging parents and all of those things. So we bring that together. So that was phase 1, and Wildflower has been in health IT for 8 years now. COVID all of a sudden accelerated everything. COVID's horrible. But what it did to healthcare was really shine a light on our inefficiencies and what we didn't do well, and things that we could have done better and use telemedicine. Like, we have a healthy 20-year-old female coming in for her, monthly visit while she's pregnant, which is kind of silly. That's low value care. We're just spending the money. later on, I'll get into how the healthcare system works. It's called fee for service, which means every time you see the doctor, there's a fee, versus the newest term in healthcare, which there's a lot of legal work around, is value-based care. And value-based care means there's kind of a bundled price for what's going on, whether that be pregnancy or mental health. And there's a total price the clinicians are supposed to manage within, versus just more tests, more billing, and just keep billing, which doesn't really help anybody out and sometimes leads to unnecessary uses. So when COVID hit, we thought, what can we do to help women? Let's go back to our core in pregnancy and our hospital friends, because I don't know if you guys know this, but hospitals have had a really hard time staying afloat because of the way that the billing systems work. And there's all kinds of anti-Stark laws that impact value-based care. But we said, you know what? 50% of our clients may not pay their bills to us this year because they're hospitals. So we said, we need to be relevant for them. So let's start launching devices at home so doctors can monitor patients at home. Well, once you start getting devices out to patients at home, now you got to click into things called EHRs, which are the claims processing and the systems that a hospital use. Also a lot of regulation there. And at that point, we'd had a lot of people asking us to help with social determinant issues, housing security, food security, because 30% of what goes on in your environment has a massive impact on your total health. And particularly, we work in Medicaid also. So you can imagine the housing, food security, safety. And by the way, guys, if you've ever gone to the doctor's office and someone said, are you safe at home? Is there drug use at home? If you're a mom and you check yes to the nurse, what do you think is going to happen? The authorities are going to come in and give you interviews at your house, and you probably don't want to deal with that. So we brought it outside of the clinician to what we call care coordinators or advocates. All of this happened with COVID, right? We always knew we'd go to value-based care and move in that direction, saying, we need to shrink the healthcare balloon. It needs to cost less because our outcomes are no better than they are across the pond, right? Like we spend more and have worse outcomes. Horrible. Although it's pretty concierge here for the most part. Anyway, we knew we were going to value-based care, but this COVID thing forced us to accelerate that process into complete engagement in at home, telemedicine, mental health. More than 40% of women are not coming back to the workplace because they're taking care of kids and it's too stressful. And if you look at the studies, you'll see that women are disproportionately affected by COVID than men are. Their blue factor, they're more blue than their male counterparts because they're dealing with laundry, homeschooling, and teaching at home. So I know I probably took too much time, but I'm super passionate about this, and I'm sure all of my panelists are like, yes. And that might be a perfect lead into Susan on the mental health part.
It is. I do want to thank you for mentioning Stark, because those of you who are in my class suffered through Stark. And there is a point, and it is relevant. Value-based care, talk about an area. Value-based care is the hot thing, nobody gets it. So my clients are like, oh, we want to do value-based care. Okay, but you have to take some risk. No risk. So that's another area of great interest and great opportunity. Susan, you are a serial entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur. Brittany mentioned that 90% of startups die. You flourished, and now you're in mental health, which is, as we previously pointed, COVID is awful, and mental health has been one of the tragic sort of byproducts of COVID. You're finding a solution. So can you, tell us more about it? Sure. And then also, what do you think are the challenges? What are the biggest challenges, because you figured them out, to entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I just want to, I see we only have 15 minutes left, and I'm actually really interested in hearing from all of the amazing women and men that have tuned in today. So I'll be really, really quick. First of all, I think that with mental health, one of the biggest issues is we have no way to measure it. So if you think of a vital sign, we weigh ourselves, we know if we have a fever or not. We know for heart disease that being able to know your blood pressure has totally changed that disease. And so our premise is that we need a measurement. We need a vital sign for mental health. And so that's what we're doing. So right now, the current state is that you take a self-reported outcome, someone asks you a bunch of questions, and depending on your ability to fill it out or not, we know if you're depressed or anxious. And there's a certain level of depression and anxiety that's normal. And we should all know that. So I think the big question is, how do you know when it's not normal? And how are you able to get help? And then a staggering statistic, it's about 8 years from when people feel symptoms till they actually get diagnosed for depression and anxiety. So our belief is that if we can catch people earlier, really change their trajectory. And so for all of you that are listening today, if you have a friend or if you yourself are feeling depressed or anxious, know that there are lots of resources. And I'm happy to point you in that direction. There are a lot of them that are free too. And there's a tremendous amount of stigma and misconception in all of women's health. We've talked about that today. Where I think it's the strongest is actually around mental health, around depression and anxiety. And if you think about it, it wasn't so long ago that we referred to people that were depressed as anxious as crazy, and we sent them to insane asylums. So, who's going to raise their hand and say, "Hey, I'm depressed and anxious, I need help"? It's a really hard thing. And with regard to, I think, just this opportunity ahead of us in women's health, I would say that in my experience as a female founder, and I think that Brittany and Kristen would really echo this as well, the partners that are most important to us are the team members that add a lot of value. And the field you're going into, FemLaw, for those of you that choose to do it, it's so impactful. And you will make the difference in all of our lives that are entrepreneurs if you do your job well. There is impact, there's passion, there's focus. Your expertise makes all the difference because it's a highly regulated field, and getting good advice makes all the difference in the world. And it's actually one of the things I love about Delphine the most. So when you talk to the companies that work with her, she isn't just their general counsel or their attorney or the person that gives them advice. She's actually a team member. And I think that's something that really differentiates people in your field. So how are you participating? How are you getting involved? Are you listening to the people that you're working with? So that I think is important. And then let me just end and I'll turn it back to the questions. I wanted to add some quick stats. So outside of healthcare, 40% of US companies are actually funded by women. So I think that's something we all forget. 40%. Women-led startups generate 10% in cumulative revenue over a 5-year period. So it's a 35% higher ROI than men. But only 2% of the US venture funding goes to female founders. Only 2%. And in the last 10 years, only 3% of the almost 3,000 US digital health deals have focused on women's health. So that just is, it's not fair. So all of you can be advocates, both men and women, in helping us raise awareness about how to get involved in women's health.
Yeah. Thank you, Susan. And so the group knows, healthcare regulatory is one part of it. IP is a big part. Corporate M&A, if you're an attorney, you want to be interested in raising funds. It's not just healthcare regulatory. I work with attorneys on deals who don't know healthcare at all. But they're representing investors who are putting in, $400 million into a company, and I work with them on the healthcare regulatory pieces. But you might say, you know what, I want to be a deal attorney, and you can still be in this space. So Susan, I'm going to leave this question for you from the audience. Do you think there are any? Oh no, okay, it just moved. Hold on. Do you think there are any issues with machine learning and AI usage? So artificial intelligence, in terms of big data and bad information that might come out of it due to not understanding how that information is being used and processed. Implicit bias with AI and machine learning.
Wow, that's a great question. I love that. So I can't speak for the entire industry. I can say that they're both good and bad actors. I can say that the company that I work for, we spent 3 years on the science before we went commercial. And there's a real, I think, change to doing that. And then what I think one of the things you'll know about in healthcare is that consents are really important. So it's something that Brittany, Kristen, and I think a lot about, understanding that we need to get permission from people to use their data. So we spend a lot of time thinking about the difference between active and passive consent. So, where we hear about like a Facebook, or you hear about Google or our phones being used, we don't do that. So when we're collecting information for machine learning, we're always doing it with the permission of the patient or the student or the person. And our data scientists and our machine learning experts and our speech experts, all they do is spend time thinking about bias. So our actual data set is labeled. What that means is that we actually have clinical labels that go with it. And we did it from ages 18 to 80. And we did it for every socioeconomic group, every gender representation. So people were allowed to choose the way they identified themselves. And it's something we're constantly looking at. So I think it's very important for all of us that are in this space to think about it. Yeah. And then we also took the position with machine learning that we weren't going to be a diagnostic. So it's under the auspices of a doctor. So a doctor actually has to review the information to give it back to the patient. So that's the final way that we're trying to make sure that the way people are using the machine learning algorithms is accurate.
Yeah, it's a great topic, and it's an area that is AI and machine learning expand. It's just going to continue. So whoever wants to take this one, how do you balance the growing boom of women's health versus the trend towards using more gender neutral language, i.e. people who have vaginas rather than women?
I mean, yeah. So, like I said, when I define FemTech, I say it's improving women, female, and girls' health and wellness. Sometimes if I don't have the opportunity to say all those, I'll put the X in women to kind of identify it. I think that one of the things we could do is make a digital badge that says like, hey, we're open to the differences in gender and sex and identity, because sometimes you got 10 seconds to give an elevator pitch, right? And there's like a lot of asterisks after you give the definition or explanation of what you're doing. And so I think as long as you're being mindful, something at FemTech Focus that we're doing is, we interview a lot of people who are working on transgender health, or we talk about pelvic floor health or periods for people who are, not identifying as woman. And so I think that because we talk about it so openly and we have these episodes in our podcast, just kind of gives out that signal. I also have asked transgender folks and they're like, I just want to be called the man, or I just want to be called the woman. And I don't want you to have to make X's in the name for me and all that stuff. And so I don't think there's like a really easy way to say what the answer is to that, except if you just go out into the world with an openness, I think people will read that, and an openness to say, hey, please correct me. Because I've also interviewed Black women about Black women's health, maternal mortality in Black women. And I'm like, I am not a Black woman and I've never had a baby. If I say something offensive or that's totally off the mark, please correct me. And sometimes in the interviews they do. Actually, that's not true, Brittany, blah, 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 right? And like, I'm like, oh, that's fascinating, it turns out hormone replacement therapy is not what transgender folks are saying anymore. They're saying gender affirming hormone therapy. Cool. Like we have that on the record on the podcast of me saying it wrong and them correcting me and like us moving forward. So I think as long as you're just living it out loud like that, that's kind of how I could do it.
I think it's great you're raising it, because this entire field is struggling with labels and how do we change those labels. So if you have a suggestion, I get back to menopause. Menopause means a pause. And it was a term that was coined in the 1800s when a physician thought that it was a disease that women got that was temporary, temporary pause. A, it's not a disease. B, it's not a pause, yet we still use it. And we still use the term for, I just get so agitated. So I actually asked a friend of mine who's an amazing marketer, and I said, this is not my forte. You come up with the term, right? There are other areas in our lives where the language has changed, and while it might take some time, but you're probably better suited than we are from a generational perspective to come up with a term that's better. I've tried gender health, and then people are like, oh, does that mean women's health? That's not great. You don't want a euphemism either, or people are, so talk about an area that you can coin. We could talk for an entire conference, and just, Brittany just came off organizing a FemTech summit, which was amazing the last 2 days. Quickly, Kristen, Susan, Brittany, I've said this a million times. I want to write a book on things I wish people had told me that I didn't have to figure out myself by stumbling and falling flat on my face. what's the advice that you would give, whether you're a man or a woman, but you're a person starting out in your career?
I'll start here. Number one, in healthcare, it is a business, and it is 1 in 8 households in the US. So whether you're female focused or in healthcare, it's got to get better in the US. Be fearless, get uncomfortable. Maybe you end up in pharmaceutical law, maybe you end up somewhere else. And my personal bit of pharmacist advice is plan B. You guys have all seen the commercials. It doesn't work if you've already ovulated. I'm just going to tell you that. Don't believe that that is the solution the next morning. I'm a pharmacist. Most women don't know that. And men, you guys are involved in that too. So FYI.
BMI affects the effectiveness of that too, right?
Yeah. But again, it is like taking a sugar pill. If you've already ovulated, the egg has released out, you might as well drink a Coca-Cola. It doesn't work. My second child is a plan B, baby. Just saying.
Who would have thought you would have learned this on this panel? But probably the most practical advice, right? Susan.
Sure. Yeah, so I'd tell you, so I wish someone had told me early in my career the importance and the power of networking. Delphine started with all of that. I really hope all of you will connect with the 4 of us here. I cannot stress with you how much my life changed once I figured that out. So I would encourage you to find your own board of directors early. Whether it's a combination of men or women, just make sure they're really diverse. You don't want them to look and sound like you. You're the best mentors and friends that you have are people that are on different paths, and keep them close. So I've had a group of girlfriends that have been part of my world for over a decade, and we talk once a month and we share stories, and it's been incredibly useful. It's also a lot less expensive than having an executive coach the whole time. So really, really also cost savings as well. And then I'd also say just make an impact. Whatever you do, find a lot of passion, make an impact. We're so excited to see all of you on the call, and I can't wait to see what you all do.
See, that's a great point. And, I hear all the time, I don't like networking. Don't think of it as networking. You're developing relationships. And these might be relationships that you nurture for 30 years, or all of a sudden that person's interviewing you, or who knows, they're relationships. And women are great at developing relationships. Brittany, what's the advice? And if you need more advice, she has office hours. Look at that.
One, the people in charge are probably not as smart as you think they are. So like investors, I thought like they were all powerful and all knowing. And I was just this founder like begging for their money and was like, I know you're like so much smarter than me. And I felt like this inferior power struggle. And then I became an investor and I was like, wait, y'all are in charge? Like you are the ones making the decisions. So if you are a founder or you think there's like some people out there that are like way, way, way more advanced than you, have some faith in yourself. I promise you, you may be smarter than them. Okay. So don't feel inferior. You're way smarter than you think yourself. You are. Number 2, you're pre-approved. I always thought that I had to prove myself in order to get whatever validation or even belong. You are pre-approved, like those credit card letters you get in the mail. All right. You're freaking pre-approved. You don't have to do anything to get it. And third, keep asking, ask. You'll never get it if you don't ask for it. And the worst that could happen is that they say no. And I have gotten into more summits for free because I emailed them and asked. I've gotten more invites to exclusive dinner parties because I went up to the organizer and said, like, hey, is there an extra seat at the speaker dinner? And they're like, actually, yeah, you want to come? And I was like, yes, I do. Like just keep asking. You would not believe how many things I've gotten into because I just asked.
And I'll close up by saying all 3 of the women on this panel, I mean, incredible accomplishments. And Susan used the word lucky. There is an element of luck. There's also an element of super hard work. And if I'm working late on a Saturday night, who's pinging me back? Susan or Kristen on a Sunday night or Brittany. So it is that confidence. It is developing relationships, and you still have to work really hard. But all of you, as Brittany says, are pre-approved. And I do hope that you become, if not more knowledgeable now when women's health comes up or whatever term you coin, and also think about what are areas beyond the traditional, I'm going to be a litigator, I'm going to be, where, because right now the legal industry is split into subsectors, right? You have hospitality lawyers, you have construction workers. This is an opportunity in so many different shapes for you to explore. So thank you again. Thank you to Villanova Law School. Thank you to Stephanie. Where's Stephanie? Oh, there she is. For organizing this, and to Sarah, and for all of your inspiration. And thank you to our panelists.
Yeah, thank you all so much. It was so wonderful to hear from all of you, and you took time out of your schedules to discuss these issues with us and introduce us to these topics if we weren't familiar. We're so appreciative, and I hope we can do stuff further in the future.
Thanks
Right.
again. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
We hope to hear from all of you. Bye.
Yes, and Krishna has more advice on Plan B.
Delphine, thank you for putting this together. Delphine's an
Thank you.
amazing professor as well as an incredible attorney. So thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.